All right, let's go ahead and get started. For the sake of time, I'm going to dive in. My name is Anjuan Simmons. I am from Houston, Texas, in the United States. And I want to thank all of you for coming to my talk. I know there's lots of talks in this track, and you could have gone to any of them, but you come to mine, so I really appreciate that. And I just want to say that I almost did not get into the country, and it was a bit touch and go. The United States has a CDC, which is our health center, basically, and Norway does not accept the CDC card from America. So I had to go through a few hoops, but I'm here, happy to be here. I kind of walked around, thank you, Norway or Oslo a little bit, and I went to the Royal Palace, and I thought, that's a nice building. And that reminded me that we don't have a monarchy in America. And monarchies are kind of cool because most of our presidents are really boring. I mean, we have a couple interesting presidents. Our current one's really boring, and I like boring presidents. So I really feel good about that. All right, so welcome to Lending Privilege. And this is a talk that I'm usually brought in to talk about inclusion and diversity. I'm going to talk about that as we go through this talk. But a reason that a lot of conferences and some corporations and some college campuses bring me in is because they are asking, what can we do to be more inclusive? Or what can we do to get better policies or get better practices to become more diverse? And those are good questions, but they're not really the right question. Because what most companies, most people should be asking is, what are we going to do when inclusion gets here? Because inclusion is coming. It's happening. It's on its way. And we work in an industry, technology and software development, that has unfortunately only recently began to open up a little bit, right? At a conference like this one, 10 years ago, we would not have had nearly as many women as we have here. I want to thank all the women for being here. Hopefully you're finding this to be a very welcoming event. But that was not the case even 10 years ago, because our industry was not as welcoming to women or to people of color or to gay people as it is right now. So while we've made advances in our inclusion and our openness, we still have a long way to go. And as a person of color, I know that I've had to balance coming into an industry that has historically excluded me and balancing my career aspirations. So I'm always having to fight these two things. What I want to do with my career, but also realizing that I don't see a lot of people who look like me in software development. But this balancing act, it isn't new. Underrepresented groups have had to, for decades, deal with all of the stress of trying to push into an industry that has not made space for us. And that's just part of the experience of being a minority. And we've had to go to boycotts and go to our government agencies, sometimes taken to the streets to get basic rights and to get some sense of equality. And this struggle, however, it really isn't new, right? It isn't something that just started happening 10, 20 years ago. In fact, a few years ago, actually a couple of decades ago, there was a television show that was actually really popular. It became popular later, but when it first aired, it was popular. And one of the actors on the TV show found out something that disturbed him. He found out that an actress on the show who was as popular as he was, who was as important to the story as he was not getting paid as much as he was. Right? So this female actress was getting paid a lot less than the male actors. And so this actor decided, I'm going to do something about this. And so he went to the studio executives, the people who created the show, and he knew, because he had a lot of influence, that he had some leverage. And he used his leverage to negotiate better pay for this actress. And guess what? It worked. He was able to allow this actress to get paid what he was making. The television show was Star Trek. The actor was Leonard Nimoy, who, of course, played Spock. And the actress was Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura. That's right, Leonard Nimoy was down with equal pay for equal work way before it was cool. And what I loved about Leonard Nimoy, what I love that he did, is that he lent her his privilege. His gender privilege as a male actor, but also his influence privilege with the fans. And by doing that, he was able to further her position in her career. And, Nichelle Nichols went on to other shows after that, none as big as Star Trek. But I'm sure that action by Leonard Nimoy gave her a little bit of experience negotiating her salary. And that's what leadership does. If you're a manager, if you're a leader of people, if you're an engineering manager, then we should do things that help the people we lead be better, even when they leave our leadership, even when they leave our teams. And I think that is so important that we get into ways and we think about how can we make our industry more inclusive. Because technology is becoming even more powerful. Some of you are working on really high-grade stuff. I know with AI and machine learning, we're creating things that are going to be super, super powerful. But the drawback is that we're seeing even now that a lot of the human biases that we have and have had for centuries, we're baking into our AI. We're seeing how artificial intelligences are being used to do legal cases, and we're seeing biases encoded into those languages, those technologies. Because if we don't become more inclusive, we don't bring more people and perspectives to our technologies, we run the risk of incubating and really making permanent our own human limitations into technologies. And that's why I think that this work is so, so important. Now, notice that Leonard Nimoy did not do a few things, right? He did not go to the studio executives and say, we need to create a diversity program. He didn't go and say, we need to create some salary review process. No, Leonard Nimoy simply acted based on what he thought was right. And I see a few Leonard Nimoys in the audience watching me right now, and I think we need to deploy more Leonard Nimoys throughout our industry who are going to use our privilege to advance people who are less privileged than we are. And I'm going to talk about that in a few more minutes. Now, what I love about Leonard Nimoy is that he was not only a star on a show that was ahead of its time, he was ahead of his time because there's plenty of research that makes the business case for inclusion and diversity, right? At this point, it should be very clear that companies that are diverse when it comes to gender and when it comes to race and other measures, when we're representative and the people who work at the company, those companies almost always outperform the others that don't, right? Diverse companies are more profitable, they have higher revenues, they have all these great business outcomes that companies that aren't diverse lack. So from a business perspective, it makes sense. But I want to be clear that while the business case for inclusion and diversity is clear, it has to be more than that. We have to be involved in this work because we all should want to live in a world of justice. I don't know about you, but I want to live in a world of justice. I think we've seen enough injustice in the world to want to try to get as much of it out of our world as we can. So in a lot of ways, this work is justice work. This work is work where we want anyone who has talent, no matter how that person is packaged, can come into our industry and make contributions. That's the work that we hopefully are all involved in here. Now, I've been saying diversity and inclusion, and I've been using them interchangeably, but they are really different, right? So let me give you a quick example. So let's say you're throwing a party, right? We're in Oslo. Oslo people know how to party, right? From what I understand, right? We know how to party. And so I'm sure you know what a party is. So you're having a party, and you have to invite people to your party. And so you determine, well, who's going to come to my party? You might invite some people that you went to university with. You might invite some people who you work with, or you might invite some people from your family, but you get your guest list and you invite them to the party, right? That's diversity. Diversity is inviting people to come in to your party. Inclusion, however, goes further than diversity. Inclusion means that we understand that people have had different journeys to get to a party. Some people came a long way, right? I came all the way from Texas to Norway. And so you're a little bit more welcoming to those people because you know that they had a longer journey. Inclusion means that you know that certain guests don't drink alcohol. So you make sure that you have non-alcoholic options at your party. Inclusion means that you know that certain people have favorite songs. So you make sure that you play those songs over the loudspeaker at your party, right? Inclusion means that we're helping people of different backgrounds come in and feel comfortable at your event. Because inclusion requires empathy. Diversity, you just need a stamp. And so I want to make sure that we understand that difference And I think that while companies can do a lot of work, and I'm sure that you've seen diversity programs at your companies, for inclusion, we really need people, right? We need people like all of you to do this. And so this is really a people movement, and in many ways, this is a grassroots movement. And the benefit of being an open source is that we understand grassroots movements because open source was a grassroots movement. How many people work in open source? You contribute to a repository, right? And so open source at this point is just part of work. Almost all of us work in languages that are open source. But what we have to remember is that when open source started as a movement, this is like decades ago, it was really controversial. I'm in my late 40s, so I'm dating myself. Some of you are a lot younger. I see a few people who may have remembered this time. But open source was seen as a threat to a lot of the established companies. But when the movement started happening, there was a book called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. Has anyone heard of this book before? Okay, a few people, right? So Eric S. Raymond wrote this book because he saw Linux becoming a thing. And he realized that Linux was becoming this strong force in software development. Again, this is early on. Most of us have Linux in our pockets or on our wrist. But this was this funky idea that we're going to have a kernel that we're going to let all these people work on and that it can become a viable operating system, right? And it worked, right? Linux became an operating system. Now, when I first used Linux, like adding a printer was difficult and it was really rocky. It's like a lot easier now, but it was a functional operating system that was made by a crowd of people. And what Eric S. Raymond did is that he compared the top-down centralized power system of companies like Microsoft or Apple to the Cathedral, right? Where power is centralized and you only keep people in who you select to come in. But open source is like the Bazaar, which was this babbling, boisterous, often loud assembly of people that were involved in making software. And he makes the case in the book that the open source approach has so many more benefits than the closed source way, right? And so again, all of this is very known now, but at the time, it was something that was very dangerous, or seen as being very dangerous. In fact, one of the CEOs of a really well-known company called it a cancer, right? I know some of you may know who I'm talking about. Now that company has come a long way in the meantime, and they're actually very embracing, but it wasn't that way in the beginning. Now, one of the quotes from the book that most people know is this one, and that is, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow, right? And I like that idea. And the more formalized version of this is this, where I'm going to read it. Giving a large enough beta tester and co-developer base, almost every problem will be characterized quickly and the fix obvious to someone. Now, this is, again, decades-old language. We don't use these words. And Eric S. Raymond, who's still alive, by the way, will probably disagree with me. But what he was saying, though he may not have known it, is that this is a statement of inclusion. What he's saying is that if we can bring enough people into our code base to work on it, then there's really no problem that we can't solve, right? We have to bring people in to get enough people who can see problems that may not be obvious to the people who were there before, but they can come in with fresh eyes and see problems that we've ignored for a long time, right? And like that's the power of inclusion, right? Which I think is a lot of the power of open source. But the challenge is that we often have protected repositories and we have protected cultures that keep people without privilege from coming in. And that's why I think that this talk is so important. Because no matter what problems you're having at your companies, every company has problems. One of the benefits of being a speaker is that I've gone all over the world and I've talked to people who have worked at Facebook and Netflix and Instagram and every company, even startups. All the problems are basically the same, right? We have too much technical debt, or we can't move fast enough. Like, do you have those problems at your company? Right? You heard of those? Everyone has those problems, right? And so they're all really common. But no matter what problems that you have, there's someone out there who can help to solve your problems. But the challenge is that often they're denied entry because they lack privilege, because they don't look like the people who may have founded the company, or they don't look like the first 10 engineers who were hired to be in that company. And again, we're keeping out innovation. We're keeping out problem solving. We're keeping out all those eyeballs that we need to really make sure that we have enough brain power to solve our problems. And I think that before I get into lending privilege, I want to be very clear about what privilege is not. Because I know you've probably heard the term privilege and how you have different types of privilege, and you might think, well, what does that mean? But let me tell you what privilege is not. Privilege does not mean that everything has been easy. If you have privilege, it doesn't mean that you've had everything given to you on a silver platter, right? But in many ways, it's almost like riding a bicycle, right? You're riding a bicycle up a hill, you're pedaling fast, and maybe you're getting a cramp in your leg. It's hot outside, so you're sweating. You're trying to get up that hill. But there are other people who are also trying to get up that hill, but there's obstacles that they go through. And there are obstacles that you may not even be aware of, but they're trying to get up that hill. And not only do you not have to worry about those obstacles, you have a lot of benefits as well. For example, having privilege means that you may have the benefit of not wondering, if you're driving a car and you see a police officer behind you, that, wow, maybe this might be my last car ride ever because of the color of my skin. Or maybe you're out at a bar with someone you're dating, and a coworker may happen to see you, and you don't have to worry about, well, maybe they'll think differently of me because this person is the same gender that I am. It also has the benefit of not worrying about your clothing in the morning. And I've had many women in software development share with me that so many times, like in the morning, they're just changing their clothes so many times because they have to be so careful about how they dress, right? Because there's some horrible people who may look at them differently simply because of how they're dressed, right? I'm a male, so if I'm not naked, I'm good, right? It's so much easier as men so much often, but we put this burden on women for some reason, and it just boggles the mind. And in many ways, when a woman works in technology, when they're hired, they have to do two jobs, right? They have to do the job that they were hired to do, and they have to fight all the horrible stereotypes that it's almost 2022, and these stereotypes still persist. And it's wild. And I really think we should get rid of that second job and just empower women to do whatever they were powered. Maybe React front-end developer or a PHP developer in the back-end or a DBA. We should unburden them from these horrible stereotypes that unfortunately have been baked into our culture. And I think that that's why I'm really passionate about this talk. We have to be able to make this industry more inclusive and less burdensome to the people who are trying to come in. And I think that lending privilege is really powerful in a way to do that. All right, so that's what privilege is not. What is privilege, right? Simply put, privilege is access to benefits based on traits that you possess, right? And those benefits could be access to good schools where you live. It could be access to generational wealth. It could be access to people who are connected, like politicians. It could be access to even getting certain jobs, right? That's what privilege is. It's access based on traits that you possess, all right? So there are two types of privilege, generally speaking, right? But before I go into that, there's a point I want to make about privilege, because in many ways, one thing about having privilege is that we often don't see when people, we see when people have privilege that we don't have, but we don't see when we have more privilege than others, right? So let me give you an example. This is what I call the airplane effect. And what that means is, I think everyone here has flown on an airplane, right? I think so, right? I know COVID makes it different and weird, but I think people are flying again. But you all know the experience of getting onto an airplane. So let's say you're boarding a flight and you are in row 42 and you get on the plane and you walk past the first part of the plane, and you know what that is, right? That's business class, right? First class. And so you're walking past first class, business class, and you're like, wow. And I know on my flight, I saw these basically couches in business class that like laid back, and so you could sleep on this 8-hour flight, and they get all the best beverages, and people say, may I take your coat? And like, it's amazing, right? But I'm not in business class. I'm walking all the way to row 42, like in the slums of the airplane, right? Where it's just, like, I'm way in the back, and I see all these people that I'm walking past who seem to have it so much better than I. I mean, I'm questioning my life decisions at this point, walking the row 42. But wait a minute. What about all the people behind you who would love to be in row 42, right? But I don't see them, right? Because like they're in the part of the plane where like the bathrooms aren't cleaned very often, and it's really not that great. And when the snack tray gets to them, like all the best snacks are gone, right? They're behind me. But that's how privilege works. We don't really see our privilege, and we only see people who have more privilege than we do. And I really think that we should do that we should do more than that, and begin to see other people who are less privileged than we are. Because I really think that if we can begin to lend privilege, then we can give everyone access to all of the riches of our industry. And I really think that that's really important, all right? Again, 2 categories of privilege, right? There's birth privilege, right? And that's what the 2 people who made you, and everyone here, 2 people were involved in making you. If that's not true, let me know. I want to talk to you after my talk. But there are 2 people who made you, and they gave you through genetic contributions, things that determine your gender, and in general, like your height, and in general, how you're able to walk around, right? That's what I call birth privilege. But then there's what I call selected privileges. And those are things that we get as we grow, right? So you get an education, or maybe you learn to speak different languages, maybe you get a job. And so this is what I call your portfolio of privileges. And so I have a couple of examples here of both selected privileges and birth privileges. And so this is kind of the interactive part of my talk. Everyone should look up and then see what privileges do you have, right? Some of you may have all of these, but I'm sure that everyone in here has at least one. Now, look up here and then get a sense of which ones do you think that you have. And then think about your career in software development. How different would your career be without your gender privilege? If you were born a different gender, or your racial privilege, or going to a great school, or even without the ability to walk, maybe you're confined to a wheelchair, right? How different would your journey in software development be without your privileges? And then realize that there are people that you probably work with almost daily who don't have those privileges. And they go throughout their careers at a significant disadvantage. And I really think that lending privilege can be a way to help those disadvantages at least be reduced and hopefully go away, right? That's what this talk is all about. All right, so I'm gonna talk about 3 types of lending privilege. And I'm going to use these women. They're real people. They're not like AI, but I'm giving them fake names, right? So I'm going to go from left to right. Let's say there's B on the left, there's L in the middle, and Emma or M on the right? So B, L, and M are these examples. And I'm going to just use them as ways that can illustrate lending privilege, all right? Are y'all ready? Okay. So the first type of privilege lending is what I call credibility lending. And that's providing visibility to people who lack privilege. And I've been very lucky to work with LGBTQ people in technology who are some of the brightest, most just insightful people that I've worked with. But often members of that community share with me that they don't really see themselves in technology. Now, again, it's getting better, but it's hard to see founders of startups and CEOs in the community. Again, getting better, but not there. And so there's a lack of feeling that they belong in our industry, right? By the way, the same concept applies to people who are handicapped. And so we don't often see at conferences like this people who use wheelchairs or have obvious physical disabilities. And so I am really into accessibility. I know if any of you work in accessibility, and hopefully you're making your applications and software more accessible, because you really should do that, because if you don't die, at some point you will become someone with a disability, right? That's just part of aging, right? If you're lucky to live to be 90s or get into your 100s, your eyesight's gonna change. Your hearing is gonna change, right? Your ability to walk is gonna change. So we should be involved in accessibility because it's really an investment in the future version of ourselves. So if for no other reason than being selfish, we should all be into accessibility and really keen to make the world more accessible. So how does this work? So let me give you the example. This is an American show a few years ago, and you see Stephen Colbert on the left, who is talking to someone named DeRay McKesson. DeRay McKesson, at least in the States, is a very well-known black activist. But if you look at the picture, you see that Colbert is in the guest chair and DeRay is in the host chair, right? Colbert switched places. And by doing that simple act, he allowed DeRay to have the power of the platform of his show, right? That is this type of lending privilege, right? Credibility lending, right? How can this work at your company? Well, so this is B. And, she was the person who got that feature over the line, right? You've been working for months to get it done. You've fallen behind schedule. B was added to the project, got it done. And she did it in a time frame that no one thought was possible. But here's the challenge. Most of the leadership team of your company, they don't even know her name, right? In fact, when she comes to work late at night, the security team thinks that she's part of the cleaning crew because only when people who come to clean their offices, that's the only time when they see people who look like her, right? I've been through that, right? Because often I don't look like the majority, so I must be either a cleaning person or maybe even I don't belong in the building that I work at, right? I've been stopped and asked, why are you here? I work here, right? And that's something that a lot of people of color go through, unfortunately. So what can we do to lend privilege to be? Well, if you have access to the leadership team, and a lot of you probably do, maybe you are a leader, but if you have access to the leadership team, why don't you invite B to present at a meeting, right? Especially if it's about her work. And by doing that, by getting her involved in that meeting, you're putting her on the radar of the people who are decision makers at your company, right? You're getting her close to the people who are power brokers in your organization. And it may seem small, but so many times, the way that promotions work at companies, we promote who we see, right? We promote who we know. And when people, for no reason, through no fault of themselves, they don't get the visibility. And so often they don't get the promotions. And so that is a simple way that you can do this type of privilege lending. All right, let's go to the second type. Access lending. That's providing entry to people who lack privilege. And again, I've shared that women in our industry often feel, because there still is a lot of sexism in our industry, and it doesn't happen as often as it did 10 years ago, but it's still here. And because of the sexism and the misogyny in our industry, often women feel that, I have to exit this industry because it's so hard, it's so oppressive. And again, the data is clear that when we have gender parity at companies, company performance goes up. So we are robbing ourselves of better business outcomes because we don't treat women as well as we should, right? And I really want to change that. So what can we do? Well, I think that access lending can be a powerful way to do this. All right, here's the example. So the person on the left is Octavia Spencer, who's a very well-known actress, at least in America. I think she may have been internationally played, but she is, again, an Academy Award-winning actress. The woman on the right is Jessica Chastain, who is also a very well-regarded actress. Well, a couple years ago, they were cast for a movie to play roles, and they had worked together before, but Octavia was offered a pittance of a offer for this movie, right? I mean, she was being paid just way below her pay grade based on being an Academy Award-winning actress. Well, when Jessica heard about this, she said, you know what? I'm going to make sure that you get paid what I get paid. And so Jessica went to the studio executives, very similar to Leonard Nimoy, and she negotiated on Octavia's behalf, and she got an offer that was 5 times the initial offer, right? And that's how this type of lending privilege can work. You allow people access to rooms that are normally close to them so that you can help them get treated as well as you expect to be treated, right? It's really powerful. All right. This is another example of this, and I realized that all of my examples were basically American, and so I needed to be more inclusive in my own talk about inclusion. So I added this example recently, so you're getting a fresh version of this talk. David Bowie, who I think everyone knows David Bowie, right? All right, all right, all right. Very famous singer, and he was invited to talk to MTV. And this was an interview about his song Let's Dance, right? Let's Dance is a banger, it's a great song, but it was new at the time. So he's invited to talk about Let's Dance. And David Bowie, out of the blue, turns to the person interviewing him, and he says, you know, I've noticed that MTV, you don't play a lot of videos from black artists, right? Now, he's there to talk about Let's Dance, and he's bringing up this very controversial thing, and it was wild. I mean, and the interviewer kind of stumbles and says, well, just, you know, excuses. But that's what this type of privilege lending is. It's simply sometimes asking a question at an uncomfortable moment, but to get to a very important outcome, right? He was basically saying that we need to treat black artists as well as white artists, right? That's why I will always love David Bowie, all right? And so how can it work at your companies? Well, like I said, this is Elle, and Elle is the person who, you know, she single-handedly created your container strategy, right? She worked and got Docker images set up and got them running well, I mean, almost by herself. But you know, what's weird is that when it's time to send people to conferences like this one, she's never considered, right? She's never considered. She's just not even seen. So how can you lend her this type of privilege? Well, if you have budget to send people to conferences, why don't you look for people who don't look like the people who usually go, right? Look at who usually goes and think, are there people who lack privilege, who I can find, who are doing great work, and send them to that Docker conference, right? Maybe Kubernetes or whatever. And by doing that, you help them see, I have a place in this industry, right? My company thought enough of me to send me to this conference. And not only will you help enrich her career, but you will enrich those conferences, right? So conferences like this are better when they're diverse, when we have different perspectives, different backgrounds. Hopefully you've had conversations either in the hallway track or during a talk, or if you went to the Christmas dinner last night, you met people who did not look like you. And you got ideas that you hadn't thought of, right? That's why this stuff is so powerful. All right, so expertise lending, right? That's the final version that I'm going to talk about. Expertise lending is lending a voice to people who lack privilege. Now, I'm a black person in technology. I've been working in the field for almost 25 years. I started at Accenture, then I worked at Deloitte, and now I'm at a smaller company. And I don't see a lot of black people, and I'm an engineering manager, right? I lead a team of software developers. And at conferences, usually, if you look at the speaker list, I may be the one black face, maybe there are a couple. It's getting better, but still, I don't see a lot of examples of me, right? I don't see me at these events. I don't see me in technology often. And I think that what that causes people to do, again, is to question, do I have a place in this industry? And I really think that expertise lending can do that, right? All right, so here's M. Oh, here's the example. Sorry, before I go to M. So former First Lady Michelle Obama was at South by Southwest, which is, has anybody been to South by Southwest in Austin, Texas? I know it's a long way. It's a really well-known technology conference. It was virtual. It was actually canceled last year. You been to South by? Saw it online, right? It's been virtual. They canceled it for the first time when COVID first broke out. It was like, I mean, it's a long-running conference, so that was wild. So I've been lucky to speak at South by Southwest a few times. So she was there. I saw her husband, actually. He was in the, so South by Southwest, a little bit of a sidebar, is basically 3 conferences in one, 3 festivals. There's the technology one, there's the film festival, then the music festival, right? That's how it works. So if you ever get a chance to go all the way to Austin, Texas for South by, I do recommend it. So Barack Obama was in the interactive or the technology part of it, and she came to the music part. But when she had her talk, she asked a question that I thought was very powerful. And it really was about lending privilege. She said, if you got a voice at the table, look around the table and ask, are there voices and opinions that don't sound like yours, right? Have you thought about that at your companies when you're in your leadership meeting or your manager's meeting? Like, are there people in those meetings when you're talking about what the teams are going to work on, or you're trying to figure out some problem like, wow, how are we going to solve technical debt, or how are we going to get these features out? Are there voices that don't look like yours in that meeting? I think that's a powerful, powerful question to ask. But, I think we need to do more than just ask about missing voices. I think we need to do what we can to give those voices a seat at the table. All right, so again, here's M. So M is amazing. She is the person who has been with the company for several years. She's a one-person onboarding team. When people join, she gets them set up with their environment, and she says, here are all the skeletons in the code base that you need to be aware of, and this is something we don't really touch very often. She's just well-regarded by everyone at the company. But there's just one problem, right? M has never had a chance to be a tech lead. She's never had a chance to lead a project. And so she's never had a chance to actually see, can she be a leader at the company? And you can lend her privilege by, if you're one of the people who determines who gets projects and who should lead them, why not give her a chance to lead that project? Those really career-making projects that during performance review time that are going to really pop on her review form, why don't you give her a chance to lead that project, right? You should talk to her first and really make sure that she's comfortable with that. But I think by doing that, you let her know that I can lead. And you increase the chance that she'll stay at your company, but not only stay, but eventually help to lead it, right? That's why this is really powerful. So I've gone through several examples of lending privilege, and I hope that as I've talked, you begin to think, oh, that doesn't sound that hard. That doesn't sound that bad. And I want to be clear that, this is not a silver bullet, right? This is not something that you can try once and it didn't go well, you're going to stop. This is in many ways a mindset. It's a mindset of being involved in seeing where can I, across the privileged landscape, make a difference. And I'm positive that everyone in here has some type of privilege that you can lend. And I also want to be clear that, this is not really about giving up things that you value, right? It doesn't mean that you lose things I got to lose this to help these people. No, it's really just a matter of sharing things that you already have, right? That's what this is all about. Now, I also think that many of you probably want to leave a legacy in software, right? You want to make your mark. You want to be the person who wrote that library that everyone uses, right? You want to be that person with your name on those commits, on those pull requests, and you want to have some kind of mark. Maybe you want to found your own company. And I understand that. That's great. I love that you want to do that. But honestly, no matter what you're working on, at some point, it's going to have 0 users. At some point, there will be no one using your library, no one using your software application. When I started my career at Accenture back in the 1990s, I was working on multi-million-dollar projects. Guess how many users they have today? 0. They've been decommissioned. Maybe we deployed it to production and we had a few people use it and then immediately just fell over, right? We got paid a lot, but the adoption wasn't really what it needed to be, right? How many of you used MySpace back in the day? Anybody remember MySpace or remember Friendster? Guess how many users they have? They may have a few, but not a lot, right? Basically, they're dead. No matter what you're working on today, at some point, it's gonna die. It's gonna have 0 people using it. So if you want to leave a legacy, I think lending privilege can be a powerful way to do that. I know there are people early in my career who lent me their privilege, and that action has echoed throughout my career, even to this present day. In many ways, I'm standing before you on this stage because people lent me their privilege. And so I think if you really want to have a legacy, if you really want to make a difference that will last, you can do it by lending your privilege. It's going to be way more effective than trying to figure out how to make production run, 1.2 seconds faster or get uptime down to 3 nines or whatever you're working on, right? That's all great. But the people aspect, you can do things that will influence generations. You can open up doors to people that will last until they're in the grave, right? That's why I'm passionate about this work, because it really does make a difference. And I think that, again, lending privilege is a powerful way to leave a legacy. But this legacy, and again, I'm from America, this legacy of improvement and changing lives is deeply rooted in my country. This is Common. Common's an American rapper. That might be my black privilege. I don't know who Common is. Anyone know who Common is? I know a few people, right? Okay. So Common's a rapper, very talented dude. I like a lot of his work. And he worked on a song with John Legend, another American artist, for a movie called Selma. And he worked on a song called Glory, right? Simple title, Glory. And the hook for Glory goes like this. One day, when the glory comes, it will be ours. It will be ours. And it's a simple phrase, but I love it because it really talks about the power of inclusion and diversity. Because this work isn't about men versus women, or white people versus black people, or straight people versus gay people. It's everyone against misogyny. It's everyone against racism. It's everyone against homophobia. That's what this work is about. And you know what? I am more convinced than ever that we're going to win this, right? Dr. Martin Luther King said that the arc of human history is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think that we can look over even the last 50 years, and we've seen improvements, right? Oslo isn't what it was 50 years ago. There are people who walk the streets of Oslo in peace who probably could not do that 50 years ago, right? There's places in my country where actually even today, if you buy a house in certain areas of Houston, Texas, in the deed, there's language that says that you cannot sell this house to a non-white person, right? Because these contracts have not been updated, those are still on the books, right? So we see the echoes of keeping people out, enshrined in buying a house, right? The most basic thing that you can do, right? One of the biggest wealth creation things that you can do is buy a house. But certain black people buy homes that has language that says, we don't want you to do this, right? But things in general have gotten better. And one thing I love about America, and I know I'm far away from the country, is when you look at the founding fathers, that in many ways, they built a pull request system into the Constitution. They're called amendments, right? And so when you look at America's Constitution, it's actually a very brief document. You have Article 1, which describes, I think, Congress, and Article 2 describes the presidency, Article 3 describes the Supreme Court. But if you keep reading the Constitution, you get back to the amendments, right? And that's where, I think the good stuff is. So when you read the Constitution, you see that there have only been 27 deployments to production of these amendments. So it's a messy process. It's hard to do, but it works. And just like in your code bases, I'm sure that there's a lot of good stuff in pull requests. In the amendments, there's a lot of good stuff, right? So we look at the 13th Amendment. When a lot of people read that, they think, oh, that's the one that set black people free, right? Well, it did that. But it did more than that. The 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution said that no one can be a slave in America. And so while my ancestors who were brought to America in slave ships to work for free, I'm sure that they celebrated the passage of that amendment. Everyone should have celebrated that because America really became a country where everyone was truly free. And the 19th Amendment to the Constitution gave women the right to vote. That's right, for the first 100 and so years of America's history, women could not vote. And the 17th Amendment changed that. And while the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. And while when that amendment was passed, I'm sure a lot of women celebrated, but men should have celebrated too, because that meant that America was now a country that no longer held people's gender against them at the ballot box. And then if we leave the amendments and go to a few years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court said that gay marriage is just marriage. I'm sure a lot of my LGBTQ friends celebrated, but those of us who are straight, right, we should have celebrated too, because we created a country at that point that no longer put limits on love. And so as America has struggled with our own peculiar issues, we've seen progress in how black people are treated, how women are treated, how gay people are treated. And I think that we're doing that in technology too. I think that lending privilege is a powerful way to do that. I think all of you can be a part of making this industry better. Again, it's not about whites versus blacks, men versus women, straight versus gay. It's about everyone for justice. And we're going to win. We're going to win this. One day, when the glory comes, it will be ours. It will be ours. So I know that I give this talk, and there are times when people say it's kind of a dark talk, right? I talk about uncomfortable things like, oh, slavery and racism. And I understand that. I understand that it can be tough to talk about these ideas. But it's even tougher being someone who may have a certain skin color that makes it hard to be in technology. It can be even harder being someone who has a certain gender, who is unfairly treated, even at conferences like this. It can be even harder having someone who may have to use a walking chair or a wheelchair or walker, right, and have trouble even getting to work, right? That's really hard. But I don't want to get too cynical. In many ways, America and European countries, we're not perfect, right? But we're also not broken. In many ways, we're simply unfinished, right? I'm learning more about the history of Norway and the things that I've gone through politically in this country, just like other parts of this part of the world. And I've seen progress, like I've seen in my own country. And I think that we have to understand that it can seem like there's a lot of broken things happening, right? It seems like we're always deploying breaking changes, like just like we do sometimes with our code. And we see steps back. But I really think that we can all have a powerful part of making things better. And the good news is that we've always used technology to make ourselves better. The printing press in the United States was a big part of the anti-slavery movement, right? That was a technology that was used to help expand freedom to different people. And we've also seen technologies like radio and television and Twitter also being used as platforms to make the world better. Now, of course, there are people who use those same platforms to do the opposite, but those platforms can be powerful. And I really think that we have to choose, what are we going to do, right? What side are we going to be on? And in many ways, we have to decide, are we going to be part of the people who are moving to make this industry welcoming, where, again, we want to welcome talent no matter how it's packaged? Or do we want to be people who keep people out, right? And we can make this industry more welcoming by who we hire, who we pair program with, who do we make leaders in our organizations, right? By making those choices, we make the world more just. I know the side that I'm on, and I hope that you know what side you're on too. And our choice plays out in our families, right? As someone who is male, and I have two sons who are 14 years old and 15 years old, part of my role as a man is to just talk to them about, hey, there's certain things that you need to understand about women and consent and respect. And I really want to say this because as men, it's easy to do this in front of women, to like, oh, I'm a feminist and I'm all this. But it's when women aren't around that we can really be powerful. And talking to other men about these things, right? That's how lending privilege goes beyond the walls of our companies and into the world. And it shouldn't be like a one-time speech, right? This is part of the normal conversations that I have with my sons. And I think it's an important conversation that all men should have with their sons. And as a person of color, I always appreciate when people talk about race in front of me. When white people say, oh, what happened to George Floyd? That was so bad. I'm like, yes, it was so bad. But what's more powerful is when there aren't any black people in the room and white people talk about race and issues. And the fact that there's still inequality that black people go through, just living even in America. There was a study that showed that when a police officer pulls over someone in a car, if the person driving the car is black, they're like 5 times more likely to be pulled over than a white person. The only time when this did not happen was at nighttime, when it was harder to see the race of the person driving the car, right? Why not talk about that with your white friends? Might be interesting. I'm not sure if people know that, right? It's simple. Having these conversations can be powerful. And what's sad is that black people often have to express outrage in order to get the breadcrumbs of justice. And I think that we can all do something to make that easier to get to. And, I'm a straight cisgendered person. I work in a heteronormative industry, and it's easy for me to go to a pride parade or to wear a rainbow-colored flag. But, it's even better when straight people talk about gay issues where there aren't any gay people around. In certain states in America, again, it's almost 2022, you can be fired for being gay. Like in several states, that's still on the books. Someone can say, you're gay, you're fired. Why? Because you're gay. Why don't straight people talk about that when there aren't any gay people around, right? That's how we get the change. And again, these are conversations that are uncomfortable, but they're conversations that are necessary. And I hope that you all have the bravery and the courage to have those conversations in your own private moments. So I know that this talk is one where you may say, hey, Anjuan, thanks for coming to Oslo. Thanks for the talk. But you know what? I just write PHP. Or I'm a Python developer, right? I'm a data scientist. All this inclusion and diversity talk, kind of cool, but not my jam. I just want to go to work and leave and get my paycheck. And I understand that sentiment. I do. But I have to imagine, and I don't know if this happened, but if Leonard Nimoy, when he went into the offices to negotiate a better salary for Nichelle Nichols, that if he was asked, we're making a sci-fi TV show, what does that have to do with fairly paying a black woman? Again, I don't know if he said that, if he was asked that, but I do think that if he was asked that question, he would say it has everything to do with paying a black woman, because I play a character that symbolizes the power of infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And part of that means that we are going to let this fellow artist get paid the same as the other fellow artist. So I hope that you all see that this is vitally important work and that you can all be a part of it. If we want our industry to be one where everyone can come in and truly innovate, truly push us forward, then this is great work to do. It's really great work to do. It's really important work that we should all be a part of. So I hope that if you want our industry to succeed, if you want women, people of color, LGBTQ people, and other marginalized groups to not only come into our industry, but to stay and get promoted, if you want to have this big, boisterous, babbling bazaar where no bug is deep, then you can have a role to play by lending your privilege. And this is how we make companies more valuable, right? Diversity and inclusion work can do so much more to improve the bottom line of our companies. But again, I want to reemphasize that this is justice work. It's not just about business, it's about justice. So I really hope that as you leave my session, that you feel empowered to lend a hand, lend an ear, and to lend your privilege. Thank you. All right.